Well, welcome to the show. We've had Jerry Mitchell from the Clarion Ledger on a few times in recent weeks, and he's doing a series of investigative reports on the Mississippi prison situation. And of course, we're going to talk to him about that continuing series. I've had some feedback out in the community. People have said, well, you're showing a lot of the negative things about the prison situation. Aren't there some positive things? And I'm going to talk to Jerry about the possibility that maybe there are some positive things about the Mississippi prison system. And of course, Mississippi prison industries, that's one thing that's a positive. And there are other things that are positive. But we're going to talk more about the ongoing series. And there's a lot to talk about. It's sort of a hair-raising series when you find out some of the things that most people don't know about. So we're going to talk to Jerry Mitchell when we come back after these important messages. Stay with us.
Since 1849, Carter Jewelers has been a part of Jackson's rich history. Over 163 years later, we've not only survived, Carter Jewelers has flourished. From generation to generation, we've established a tradition of excellence. Our reputation is built on customer satisfaction, service, and trust. Every piece of jewelry is handpicked, so you know you're getting the best value.
Nobody says I do like we do at Carter Jewelers.
Come see us and be part of our history.
Ingalls Shipbuilding is hiring electricians, structural welders, machinists, ship fitters, pipe fitters, and pipe welders in our Pascagoula, Mississippi site. Signing bonuses available for pipe welders only. Positions are union represented. Come build your career with Ingalls Shipbuilding. Go to www.huntingtoningalls.com/careers or call 888-935-1507. Well, Jerry Mitchell with us from the Clarion Ledger. Jerry, thanks.
It's good to be here.
Thank you for coming again. The series that you're doing on Mississippi prisons, what kind of feedback are you getting from people out there?
Well, quite a bit of feedback. A lot of people that are contacting us are families, for example, that have a loved one behind bars and have had certain experiences. So we're getting those kind of feedback, getting feedback from inmates. Letters and, believe it or not, phone calls from inmates that are out there and responding, or they have their own issues, or otherwise they're kind of calling. And for the most part, interestingly, it's been pretty positive.
What are the inmates who are calling saying?
Well, some of them are having issues with, for example, parole. The parole. You know, basically because of the change in the law this past go round, and some of them now are disqualified from being paroled at this, or having a parole hearing.
And why is that people are being disqualified from being able to be paroled?
Well, the law changed, and so therefore they ended up being able to, you know, they don't qualify now because of the change in the law and the interpretation. And I might add, there was a court case that came down as well. So it's not just the law, it's a court case as well. I should be clear on that.
So if a person is expecting to be paroled and then that changes.
They have a parole hearing, actually, in which they decide whether to actually be paroled or not. But yeah, those parole hearings have been set off for people like convicted of cocaine sales or other drug sales.
Mm-hmm. One of the things you talked about in the recent articles was that the sentencing guidelines are so stiff in Mississippi, or so.
Well, it's not guidelines, it's the sentences delivered. I mean, there's a lot of discretion. Judges have a lot of discretion in Mississippi. Like armed robbery, you can go anywhere from just a few years to life in prison. So that's a pretty big...
And that's up to the judge.
Yeah, it's entirely up to the judge. And so some of the judges feel like they have to be tough, you know, on crime or whatever, and then obviously it may be deserved. I'm not saying one way or the other, but one of the problems has been our kind of over-incarceration of people. Mississippi incarcerates as many people or more than Russia and China combined per capita. So we put a lot of people behind bars.
And the cost is, when you really learn, it's staggering, the amount of money. How much
$389 million last year.
$389 million
Yeah.
to run the system.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. That's a lot. That's more than most agencies, state agencies, get in Mississippi by far. And, you know, you could take quite a few of them and combine them, and it'd be less than that.
And the cost per inmate is about equivalent to going to college for
Yes,
a year
it is. It is. It's actually cheaper to go to college than it is to go to prison. You know what it costs to house an inmate per year at Parchment, let's say.
And then, you know, one of the things you touched on in recent articles was the fact that we've got the private sector now involved with,
Right.
with the prison management, right, or prison
Well,
ownership.
part of the prisons are run by the state, and then part of the prisons are run by the private prisons, and they're able to do it in general cheaper than the state does.
But does that mean a for-profit corporation would want to cut corners, possibly to be more profitable?
Well, one of the issues is officers, for example. They may cut back on that, and it's kind of hard anyway to keep officers because of such low wages. I mean, these correctional officers are not paid much more than you'd make working at McDonald's. In fact, one with a family of 3, a starting salary qualifies you for food stamps. So
and they would be employees of that corporation, not employees of the state.
that's correct. That's the way that operates.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still under the auspices of the state, but it is in fact private.
Now, one of those privately run facilities is in the eastern portion of the state, right?
Right, East Mississippi Correctional Facility.
And that one
Meridian.
particularly, or that's one of them that was sort of focused on as
Yes.
not having the greatest conditions, right?
Yeah, there's some of the photos from that are just horrific. I mean, you see some of the photos that came from just a visit, from what I understand, and an announced visit, I might add. This wasn't like an unknown visit that was being made or a surprise visit, you know, that kind of thing. And so these lawyers just took photographs, I mean, blood on the floor, just the conditions of the cells. It reminded you really of something you'd see in another country, not in the United States.
So how would the state look at something like that? I would think that they would be appalled to see that.
Yeah, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. I don't know. I don't know how they're going to react to it and what's going to happen. We'll see what happens. I mean, obviously, we have a new legislative session that'll be coming up starting in January, so this may be something they look at in connection with that.
Well, you've done a pretty extensive investigative report on this. What is your feeling about it? I mean, what needs to be done from what you've seen? What could be done that would improve the situation for the prisoners, for the prison, the whole system? Do you have some ideas?
Well, I mean, certainly our series talked about some of these possibilities. We talked about the possibility of, let's say, for example, you reduce the prison population, then perhaps you could increase the pay of these correctional officers, to raise it up, maybe perhaps in connection with that, raise the standards as well. I know in Michigan it's 16 weeks of training. In Mississippi it's only 3, followed by a week of on-the-job training. So those are kind of, those kind of things. And you have to actually go to college, and in the Michigan system. In Mississippi, you just need a GED.
You know, a layperson would, like myself, would say, well, I was thinking that if you work in the prison system, you'd either be a law enforcement person, right, which is usually a well-trained individual, and or maybe military.
Right.
I mean,
correct.
But what the truth of the matter is, you don't have to be either one, right?
You don't have that training, and obviously the training helps to make it more professional. And I've talked to a number of the officers themselves, and they've said that to me as well. They're actually supportive of this. They would like to see more stringent, standards and higher pay. I think those two could be connected. I think that makes sense. You raise the pay, but you also make it more stringent in terms of the standards. Here, we're going to raise the standards for these things, because you do have a certain amount of corruption that takes place. And I've had gang leaders tell me, well, this is how I corrupt the guards. I say, hey, you want $1,000? Bring in some tobacco for me. And he told me they can take that and turn that into $10,000. So that's kind of the way that operates. And that's why there's so much contraband coming inside the prison. It's not just them throwing stuff over the fences. It's coming in the front door with through the correctional officers, staff, others.
some of the positive aspects of
Yes.
what's going on. Let's
Yeah,
talk
we
about
talked about
Mississippi prison industries, for
Right,
example.
and they work to try to train inmates to teach them, skills that they can use when they get out. There's a reentry council, and they're working on a reentry manual whereby can kind of put the inmates as they leave. I mean, what do you do once they leave? Kind of the history of it has been they give them, $25, $50 in a bus ticket, bus ticket home, and that's not, So now they're coming up with an ID that would enable them to be able to, get back into society, because a lot of times they don't have an ID, and so they don't have an ID. Maybe they don't have a job, all these kinds of things. So kind of work toward. And then there's some other interesting programs. There's a prison to college pipeline program the University of Mississippi is running, and there's a professor from Mississippi College that's involved as well. And so they're basically teaching inmates. They call it the prison to college pipeline. The idea being to educate inmates, so once they get out, then they're interested in school. They want to go back to school. They want to get an education, and therefore they're not as likely to re-enter. The higher the education, the lower the recidivism rate.
Are there classes that can be taken while you're in prison, as
Yes.
far as college classes and college credit?
There's not much of that, but there's a move to try to provide some of these. Are kind of ad hoc so far. This program I just mentioned, I know that there's another program where basically a publisher, a nonprofit publisher, is going in and teaching memoir writing. And I interviewed him as well, kind of trying to get inmates to write and to connect with learning. And again, same idea is, the idea is you've got to change both the thinking about and rethinking prison. You have to kind of rethink how you treat the people on the inside. And if you try to train them and make them have more education, have these programs, then they're less likely to return. You have some kind of transition to society.
Right, you've got something that you can build toward.
Right.
It seems to me like that's an interesting idea, having college courses for credit.
Yes.
Where you can work on your degree when you get out.
Right.
Number one, it's going to be tough when you get out.
Right, correct.
But number two, at least if you're better prepared to enter the workforce and you've been working toward a degree, that would be a nice
Absolutely.
Nice thing.
And the Department of Corrections does have, and the private prisons as well, do have a GED program that they provide. So that's another means by which they can learn. But I think you want to try to build on that rather than just leaving it at the GED level.
You would think with the online capability today that you could do that.
Exactly. And of course, one of the problems is they don't really have access to online. But, to be honest, a lot of them have cell phones anyway, so why not have a controlled setting where they could have access to online, and you could lock the computers up where they could only go to certain sites. I mean, you wouldn't have to.
Right.
You could certainly watch that and limit that, and you might as well. I mean, to me, it's a means by which you want them to spend their energies on something, and it's a lot better for them to spend their energies on education and learning and those kind of things, instead of spending their energies on, say, gang activities and those other kind of things.
Right, work on a degree.
Exactly.
Okay, well, Jerry Mitchell with us, and we're going to talk to him more after these messages, so stay with us. Now, the state of Mississippi, as far as the the number of people we incarcerate, we were ranking pretty high in the national.
Right. Yeah,
scene.
we're, depending on which figures you look at, whether we're 2 or 3, second or third in the nation in incarceration rates. And we're higher than a lot of countries, or most countries in the world.
It's really amazing to think that.
You'd think we're a progressive country, and it's for the United States as well. It's not just Mississippi alone. And you would think, well, we're progressive enough that we should, as a society, we shouldn't be locking people up at a greater rate than Iran and Russia and China, but we are. We're locking them up at a much greater rate than them.
Is it because we have more bad people here, or is it because of some of the laws, or what is it? What's the reason?
Well, one of the things that's contributing to it is back in the 1980s, there was this whole belief in the 3 strikes you're out.
Right.
So once you got that 3rd felony, we're going to send you away for the maximum. Which for a lot of those, if you were violent, that meant a life sentence.
And I guess at the time that was probably people looked at it like that's a great thing. If you're a really bad guy,
sure.
you go,
You're a bad guy and you've had your chances, go off to prison. But the problem is then you fill your prisons with people that, you know, they're not getting out anytime soon, and your prison population, which is what's happened to Mississippi over the years, just increases. Now there have been a bunch of paroles over the past year, but they may be reaching the limit on that. So I mean, there's still more people coming in than there are going back out. But that's, I think with the paroles, they're probably getting to the limit of maybe at least in the first round of what they can do.
So how could the system be changed where nonviolent offenders, let's say drug addicts, could be treated in a different way where they don't end up in prison?
Well, there's already been efforts that way, and the drug courts have done a lot of good things here in Mississippi. And I think the law that just got passed this past year, Chris Epps, who's the corrections commissioner, headed up this task force that basically looked at what reforms could we make to try to reduce this, and because of the cost and other things. And so, and they came back and made a bunch of suggestions, and one of them did include expanding those drug courts. What might surprise people is more than 3/4 of the people behind bars are addicted to alcohol or drugs.
While they're in prison.
Yeah.
So they're
either before or once they get in there, yeah.
And so they're able to get drugs and alcohol, right?
Oh yeah, they can get both in prison. There's no question about that.
So that must be like an underground economy that's going on.
It's a huge underground economy that takes place. You can pretty much, as inmates put it to me, I can get anything, ice, you know, which is meth and spice and marijuana, and tobacco is banned too, and of course that's a very popular one.
So now,
and cell phones.
Cell phones. Now,
huge.
cell phones. You would think that. Wouldn't you think that we've talked about this before? Wouldn't you think that it would be fairly easy to control that, because you can see, I think, where the signals are emanating from, right? So.
Yeah, I would think so, but you'd be surprised how many inmates have a cell phone. I've talked to quite a few of them.
And
from all prisons, I might add.
All the prisons.
Yeah.
And so that means they would be able to send videos out too, right?
Yeah, I haven't gotten a video, but I've gotten a bunch of still photographs
of the conditions.
Oh yeah, conditions. Yeah.
That's very interesting. And now the popping of the locks that was mentioned in a recent story.
Right.
So, in actuality, or is this an alleged thing, or is this?
Well,
something
that does take place.
It takes place,
like on a daily basis, let's say, where you have these what they call automatic locks, which is basically the tower officer pops the lock
electronically. He
electronically hits it, and I've been in jails and prisons and witnessed it myself. So you walk in and they that's what they do. That's how you walk in the door, and then I've seen the inmates. They go, "Hey, I want to get in my cell," and then they pop the lock and they go in their cell, and that's all legitimate. I'm not knocking any of this, but what has allegedly happened in some of these cases is that correctional officers have popped locks that enable inmates to go carry out assaults or carry out, worse than that.
And is that something that has the state owned up to the fact that some of these people have done that?
Well, the state says that, well, the state has never recommended prosecution of anyone who's of that allegation. They've never recommended prosecution.
With
So-
videotape as pervasive as it is, you would think that if something like this would happen, it would be documented.
Well,
via
and
video.
there's a case of it, like for example, East Mississippi. There were a couple of cases where they had it on video where they pop locks or open doors for basically inmates to either gangs to war or an inmate to be beaten. It's on video tape.
So it actually happened.
Oh
and
yeah,
it's documented.
it's not just conjecture that this is going on, and the emails were from the company. This is when Geo had it. Said this East Mississippi said prosecute the guy, but he never got prosecuted. In fact, when I contacted the district attorney's office, they didn't even know about it. So that's part of the other thing that's happening is there are supposedly these. I don't know if the private companies are recommending and it's not making it there, or it's being ignored, or you know what I mean. It's not followed through. So you have assaults that aren't being prosecuted, I know, and you certainly have officers that aren't being prosecuted.
It's, you know, the prison population has no constituency.
No, they
there's
don't.
No
They have
one,
zero.
no one is looking after their interests at all. You know, I mean, what I mean by that is, it's an unpopular position to be in.
Yeah, I mean, no one's going to stick up for a bunch of people behind bars. I mean,
Right. So, you know, but what would be the reason a person who is in that type of a position of authority, a guard, let's say,
correctional
to
officer,
pop
yeah.
a lock in a situation like that?
Well, you have, by their own admission, some officers that are friends with or affiliated with particular gangs, and so they do favors for particular inmates. I know in one of these allegations of a lock being popped, she admitted that she had gotten $1,200 from this particular inmate to smuggle him in a bunch of stuff, which of course is illegal and all those other kind of things. But she actually admitted that. She said, no, I didn't pop the lock, but I do admit I did this with this particular inmate who was a member of the gangsters.
So if a person accepts money to allow contraband in, would that person be fired? I mean, or would
Yeah,
that...
the two of the three tower officers in this case, this is involved in the Kendrick Walker killing that happened this past May in Wilkinson County Correctional Facility. And so the allegation was one of the officers opened the lock, that one of the inmates had hidden, basically gone into another cell, pulled the door shut, which locks it. And so he was in there for 11 minutes, and then you can see on tape the officer, I mean not the officer, but the inmate coming up to the window and talking to the tower officer, both here and then comes to the side window and talks to her as well. And then shortly after he walks away from there, well, the lock opens.
And so this is documented on videotape.
Yeah, you can see it on video.
So was there any state investigation on this?
There was by the Mississippi Department of Corrections.
Mm-hmm.
I know that the family of Kendrick Walker has said they feel like the FBI should investigate. And I know in general, if you have, like, for example, let's say you have a deputy. There's an allegation that a deputy has committed a criminal act. That's the allegation. I'm not even saying it's true. The sheriff's office, in general, would not be the one to investigate that. Instead, they would call the Highway Patrol or somebody else, mm-hmm. Attorney General's office, and say, hey, you guys come over here and investigate this, because we don't want any, not only do we not want a conflict of interest, we don't even want an appearance of a conflict of interest in investigating that. But the Mississippi Department of Corrections has been the one investigating each of these killings that we're talking about, where there's been this allegation that officers have popped locks to be able to let inmates go and carry out assaults or killings.
And your series of reports will continue. How much longer?
Well, the series is done, but I'm going to keep reporting on it. I guess you can say the technical series is stopped, but I'm going to keep reporting on the issue. So
is there any idea that maybe, for example, the commissioner of the prisons, Mr. Epps, right? Are you going to be interviewing him?
I've talked to him. I've written questions. He would not. He declined to be interviewed in person, so he wouldn't do that, which kind of surprised me because he's done it in the past many times, and he and I've talked. But he submitted written answers to some of our questions and has continued to do that. And so I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen next. Again, we'll see. There's a legislature coming in January, so we'll see what.
So they'll probably
happens.
look at some of these issues.
There may be some of these issues they look at, I think.
Yeah. Well, Jared, thanks for coming
Thank you.
again, and
Appreciate it.
we'll be following the reports in the Clarion
you.
Ledger. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's Jerry Mitchell. We'll be right back after this.
Since 1849, Carter Jewelers has been a part of Jackson's rich history. Over 163 years later, we've not only survived, Carter Jewelers has flourished. From generation to generation, we've established a tradition of excellence. Our reputation is built on customer satisfaction, service, and trust. Every piece of jewelry is handpicked, so you know you're getting the best value.
Nobody says I do like we do at Carter Jewelers.
Come see us and be part of our history.
So the Clarion Ledger's a series of investigative reports by Jerry Mitchell.
And some others did help me with it.
And this can be seen on the Clarion Ledger website, right?
Correct.
ClarionLedger.com.
Right.
And then what do we see?
If they'll just go to the left, there's a little headline that says "Hard Look at Hard Time," and they can click on that and they can access all the stories that we've done.
Okay. Jerry, thank you for being with us.
Thank you very much.
And thank you. See you next time on Nightique.